Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku had a fire quirk-like endeavor. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world, for a 4-year-old, was a tapestry of absolutes. Heroes were good, villains were bad. Katsuki Bakugo was cool, and Izuku Midoriya was his best friend. The sun was warm, the sky was blue, and the greatest hero of all time was All Might. These were unshakable truths, the bedrock upon which Izuku built his tiny existence. That afternoon, under the benevolent gaze of a setting sun that bled orange and purple across the Muzutsu skyline, one of those truths was about to be immolated. They were playing in their favorite corner of the park, a small sandbox kingdom bordered by a sturdy oak tree. Katsuki, naturally, was All Might. His palms were already popping with miniature explosions, tiny starbursts of nitroglycerin-like sweat that crackled like celebratory fireworks. He stood atop the slide, a plastic monarch surveying his domain. "Fear not, citizens!" Katsuki roared, his voice far too big for his small frame. "For I am here!" Izuku, cast in the role of a grateful civilian, was crouched behind the oak tree, clutching a worn-out All Might action figure. He was supposed to be scared, then saved, then endlessly thankful. It was a familiar script. But today, something was different. A strange, restless energy hummed just beneath his skin, a fizzy anticipation that had nothing to do with the game. "You're supposed to be crying for help, Deku!" Katsuki yelled, his patience already fraying. He punctuated the sentence with a particularly loud pop crackle from his palm, kicking up a spray of sand. "I am..." Izuku stammered, trying to inject the appropriate level of panic into his voice. "Help me, All Might! The villain, he has a scary rock!" He held up a pebble, trying to sell the drama of the scene. Katsuki scoffed, a sound of pure derision. He leaped from the slide, landing with a practiced hero crouch. "That's lame. My quirk is so cool, and all you can do is get saved." He swaggered over, hands on his hips, a perfect mimicry of the real All Might's posture. He jabbed a finger at Izuku. "You'll probably never even get a quirk. My mom said some people are just duds." The word dud landed like a stone in Izuku's chest. It was a simple, childish insult, but it felt profound. Useless. A thing with no purpose. He looked down at his own empty hands, then at the crackling energy in Katsuki's. A hot, prickly feeling washed over him. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was a desperate, aching need. A need to be seen. A need to be more than a spectator in his own life story. A need to have a spark of his own. "I'm not a dud, Kaken," he whispered, his voice trembling. "What was that?" Katsuki leaned in, a predatory glint in his crimson eyes. "I can't hear you over how awesome I am." He shoved Izuku, not hard, but it was enough. Izuku stumbled back, his shoulder hitting the rough bark of the oak tree. He felt cornered. Small. The world seemed to shrink to the space between him and Katsuki's smug, explosive grin. The desperation inside him swelled, a tidal wave of emotion, fear of being nothing, desire to be something, the frantic, childish wish to just be cool like Kaken. And then it happened. The energy that had been humming beneath his skin erupted. It wasn't a thought, it wasn't a choice. It was a reflex, as instinctual as a gasp for air. A torrent of light and heat burst from his outstretched hands, but it wasn't the angry orange of a campfire or the brilliant white of Katsuki's explosions. This was a silent, luminous green. It flowed from his palms like liquid light, an ethereal, emerald river that didn't roar but sang, a low, resonant hum that vibrated in the air. The flames danced and swirled with an unnatural grace, like will-o'-the-wisps leading a traveler astray. They licked at the ground between them, and the grass didn't ignite into a raging inferno. It simply withered, turning a pale, ashen gray under the ghostly touch of the fire. Izuku stared, mesmerized and terrified. The light cast dancing green shadows on Katsuki's stunned face, his eyes wide, his jaw slack. The smugness was gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated shock. The green fire lasted only a few seconds before sputtering out, leaving behind the smell of ozone and freshly cut grass. Izuku's hands tingled, a pins and needles sensation that was both alien and deeply, fundamentally his. He looked at his palms. They were pink and tender, as if he'd held them too close to a stove. The silence that followed was heavier than any of Katsuki's explosions. The other kids in the park had stopped playing, their gazes fixed on the patch of dead grass and the two boys at its center. Katsuki was the first to move. He took a hesitant step back. He looked from Izuku's trembling hands to his face, and for the first time in their young lives, Izuku saw something other than arrogant superiority in his friend's eyes. It was a flicker of confusion, of apprehension, and something else, a glint of a challenge accepted. "Whoa!" Katsuki breathed, the word a puff of smoke in the cooling air. Weird. The absolute truth that Izuku Midoriya was a spectator had just been set on fire. The sterile, white-walled office of Dr. Kyudite Tsubasa smelled of antiseptic and old paper. The doctor, a portly man with oversized goggles and a mustache that seemed to have a life of its own, peered at the glowing chart in his hands. He hummed a tuneless, thoughtful melody, occasionally pushing his goggles further up his nose. Inko Midoriya sat rigidly in the chair opposite him, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. Izuku sat beside her, his own hands encased in soft white bandages. The initial joy and shock of his quirk's manifestation had curdled into a thick soup of anxiety, largely due to his mother's palpable fear. "Well, Mrs. Midoriya," Dr. Tsubasa finally said, swiveling in his chair to face them. "The tests are conclusive. Your son most certainly has a quirk." Inko let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Oh, thank goodness. For a moment with the burns I was so worried it was something harmful." The doctor's smile was kind, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Harmful? No. Not in the traditional sense. Powerful? Yes. Extremely. What your son possesses is a high-level pyrokinetic quirk. He's generating a unique form of plasma, and the green coloration is fascinating. We suspect trace amounts of copper or boron in his unique biological makeup are being ionized, but that's a topic for a scientific journal." He leaned forward, his tone shifting from academic curiosity to professional gravity. "The more pertinent issue is the nature of its activation. Izuku," he said, looking at the boy, "when the fire came out, what were you feeling?" Izuku shrank back a little, twisting the edge of his All Might t-shirt. I was scared," he mumbled. "Kaken was, he said I was a dud. I just wanted to be cool too." Dr. Tsubasa nodded slowly. "As we suspected. Mrs. Midoriya, your son's quirk isn't tied to his conscious will in the way most are. It appears to be directly, and violently, linked to his limbic system, his emotional and adrenal state. When he experiences intense emotions, fear, desperation, anger, even extreme joy, his body responds by producing this fire." He tapped a section of the glowing chart. "We're seeing a somatic feedback loop. The stronger the emotion, the more powerful the flame. It's an incredible power source, but for a 4-year-old boy who experiences the world in emotional extremes, it's like having a stick of dynamite with a faulty, unpredictable fuse." Inko's face had lost all its color. "A faulty fuse? What does that mean, doctor? Is he in danger?" "That is the crux of the matter," the doctor said, removing his goggles to rub his eyes. "His body can produce this immense energy, but our scans show his personal tolerance for the heat he generates is remarkably average. Perhaps even slightly below average. It's a cruel irony of genetics. His body is a furnace with paper-thin walls." He gestured to Izuku's bandaged hands. "Those are first-degree burns. Minor, but they're a warning. If you were to, say, have a severe panic attack or a moment of life-or-death desperation, the sheer output could cause third-degree burns, severe heat stroke, or worse. He could literally cook himself from the inside out." The room went silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the medical equipment. Inko looked at her son, at his wide, innocent green eyes, and saw not a hero in the making, but a fragile, precious thing in constant peril. The dream of seeing him on TV with a heroic smile was replaced by the nightmare of seeing him consumed by his own gift. "So what do we do?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Are there suppressants? Can we stop it?" "I wouldn't advise it," Dr. Tsubasa said gently. Suppressing a quirk this powerful can lead to complications. Uncontrolled build-up, psychological trauma. No, the path forward is not suppression but control. Rigorous, lifelong control. He'll need to learn emotional discipline that most adults never achieve. Meditation, breathing exercises, cognitive behavioral therapy. He must learn to become the master of his own heart, lest the fire in it consumes him. Izuku listened, not understanding all the long words, but he understood the core of it. His quirk, his amazing, cool, green fire quirk, was dangerous. It hurt him. It scared his mom. He looked at his bandaged hands, and for the first time, felt a flicker of resentment towards the brilliant spark that lived inside him. He had wanted power, and he'd gotten it. But it came with a price tag written in pain and fear. Dr. Tsubasa gave him a small, encouraging smile. Don't look so glum, son. A powerful quirk is a great blessing. You just have to be strong enough to wield it. You have the potential to be a truly magnificent hero someday. But as they left the clinic, Izuku didn't feel like a future hero. He felt like a bomb, waiting for the wrong feeling to set him off. And clutching his hand, his mother's grip was no longer just loving. It was desperate, the grip of someone trying to hold together something precious that might shatter at any moment. The next 10 years were a masterclass in contradiction. Izuku Midoriya was simultaneously powerful and fragile, a boy with a lion's roar trapped in a sparrow's chest. His life was a tightrope walk over a sea of his own emotions. His relationship with Bakugo warped into something unrecognizable from their early childhood. The day after the quirk manifestation, Bakugo had stomped up to him, his expression a thunderous mixture of anger and intrigue. Deku! He'd barked, foregoing any greeting. Do it again. Do what? Izuku stammered, instinctively hiding his hands behind his back. The weird green fire. Do it! Bakugo demanded, setting off a small explosion in his palm for emphasis. I want to see it. I can't. Izuku mumbled, his stomach twisting into a knot of anxiety. The doctor said I'm not supposed to. Bakugo's face soured. What do you mean you can't? It's your quirk, isn't it? Are you that useless you can't even control your own power? And there it was. The new insult. Not quirkless Deku or useless Deku. It was uncontrolled Deku. Reckless Deku. In Bakugo's mind, which processed the world through the lens of strength and combat, having a powerful quirk you couldn't command was the ultimate form of weakness. Their dynamic became one of explosive rivalry. Bakugo no longer saw him as a pebble on the side of the road, but as a flawed, infuriating rival. The physical bullying lessened, replaced by a constant, grating barrage of verbal challenges. Having a meltdown again, Deku? Bakugo would sneer in the middle school hallway if he saw Izuku looking stressed, a faint shimmer of heat haze already rising from his uniform's sleeves. Get a grip before you torch the whole school, you damn fire hazard. During gym class, if Izuku used a tiny, controlled puff of flame to propel himself forward in a sprint, Bakugo would rage. Is that all you've got? That's like using a flamethrower to light a candle. Pathetic. Bakugo's aggression was a strange, twisted form of motivation. He was pushing Izuku, relentlessly prodding at his greatest insecurity, his lack of control. He wanted a worthy opponent, and Izuku, in his current state, was an insult to that desire. He was a cannon that kept misfiring, and it drove Bakugo insane. Izuku, for his part, internalized every jab. He knew Kaken was right. He spent countless hours filling notebooks, not just with hero analysis, but with self-analysis. Notebook 11 for the future. Entry: fire-based heroes. Endeavor: can create precise shapes, spears, blades. Maximum output with minimal emotional bleed. His fire seems fueled by rage, but it's a focused rage. A tool. My quirk. Tentative name: Emerald Flare Amorphous. Wild. Responds to panic/desperation. Overheats my body after only 10 to 15 seconds of sustained use. Need to find a way to disconnect the trigger from my flight or fight response. Maybe focus on a single, calm emotion? Like determination? His home life was a fortress built to contain his quirk. Inko, bless her heart, had channeled her terror into hypervigilance. Their small apartment was a testament to her efforts. Fire extinguishers were mounted in every room. The smoke detectors were the most sensitive models money could buy. Izuku's wardrobe consisted almost entirely of expensive, custom-made, fire-retardant fabrics. Every day after school, the ritual was the same. "Izuku, sweetie, welcome home," she'd say, her smile warm but her eyes scanning him with the precision of a medical droid. "Let me see your hands." He would hold them out, and she would gently inspect his palms and fingers for any new redness, any sign of a flare-up. On his nightstand sat a large tub of medicated burn-soothing ointment, and a pair of soft, silk-lined gloves he was supposed to wear while sleeping, in case a nightmare triggered an incident. Her love was a warm, heavy blanket. It was comforting, but sometimes it felt suffocating. Her constant fussing was a perpetual reminder of his own defectiveness, inadvertently feeding the very anxiety she was trying to quell. He loved his mother more than anything, but he hated the fear he put in her eyes. It was a vicious, self-perpetuating cycle of anxiety and love. He tried. Gods, he tried so hard. He practiced the breathing exercises Dr. Tsubasa had recommended. In through the nose for 4, hold for 7, out through the mouth for 8. He would sit on his bedroom floor, eyes closed, trying to find a place of stillness within himself. He tried to summon the fire, just a tiny flicker, a single emerald ember in his palm. Sometimes it worked. A small, controlled flame, no bigger than his thumb, would dance to life. He would hold it for a few seconds, his heart pounding with a mixture of triumph and terror, before extinguishing it. But other times, a stray thought, a worry about a test, a memory of Bakugo's sneer, would cause the flicker to surge into a searing jet, forcing him to smother it against his fire-retardant desk mat, leaving his hands stinging and his heart racing. He was a boy walking on eggshells in his own mind. He had a sun in his soul, but he was terrified of being burned by the light. The afternoon that would redefine his life began, as many of his afternoons did, with him being a fanba. He was walking home, head buried in his freshly updated notebook, muttering to himself under the echoing arches of a city underpass. So if Kamui Woods can change the size and density of his lacquered branches, it means his control is cellular. Could I do that with emerald flare? Could I make it solid? A blade of green fire, like Endeavor? No, the heat would be too hard to contain, the energy expenditure would be massive, and my body would probably... His muttering was cut short by a sound that did not belong in the quiet underpass. A wet, gurgling roar. He looked up from his notebook just as a monstrous wave of viscous, foul-smelling sludge erupted from a nearby manhole cover. 2 massive, cartoonish eyes swam in the muck, swiveling to fixate on him. "A medium-sized invisibility cloak," the sludge villain gurgled, its voice thick and sludgy. "Perfect. Don't worry, kid, it'll only hurt for about 45 seconds. Fear, cold and absolute, seized Izuku. His carefully constructed walls of emotional control crumbled into dust. The breathing exercises, the years of practice, all of it vanished in a heartbeat. His first instinct was primal, run, but as the villain lunged, another figure shot past him. A figure with spiky blonde hair and a familiar scowl of defiant rage. "Bakugo, get the hell out of my way, you sewer scum!" Bakugo roared, thrusting his palms forward and unleashing a series of powerful explosions. The blasts rocked the underpass, but they did little to the villain's liquid form, merely splattering chunks of it against the concrete walls, which quickly oozed back into the main body. "Ooh, a feisty one!" the villain chuckled. "I like that. More fight means the heroes won't suspect a thing." In a flash, the sludge surged forward, engulfing Bakugo. Izuku could only watch in horror as his childhood friend, his rival, his tormentor, his oldest friend, was swallowed by the suffocating ooze. Bakugo's face was visible, his mouth open in a choked gasp, his eyes wide with a terror Izuku had never seen on him before. He was fighting, setting off muffled explosions within the sludge, but it was like trying to punch water. He was drowning. Time seemed to slow down. Izuku's feet were rooted to the spot. The pros were arriving now, Death Arms, Kamui Woods, Backdraft, but they were hesitating. The villain's body, the cramped space, Bakugo as a hostage, it was a nightmare scenario. "I can't get a solid grip on him," Death Arms yelled. "My wood will just burn if he uses those explosions." Kamui shouted, shielding civilians. They were waiting for someone with the right quirk. They were waiting, and Kaken was dying. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He saw Bakugo's eyes meet his. In that gaze was desperation, fury, and a plea. And something inside Izuku snapped. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't a plan. It was the same primal, heroic instinct that had moved his quirkless body in another timeline, but this time, it had fuel. The terror for his friend, the rage at the villain, the desperation of the moment. It was the perfect, volatile cocktail. The sun in his soul went supernova. He didn't throw his backpack. He screamed, a raw, wordless cry of defiance, and ran forward. Kid, no! Get back here! Death arms bellowed, but Izuku was already moving, his mind a white-hot blank. The pros saw a scrawny middle schooler on a suicide run. The villain saw an insignificant gnat. What neither of them saw was the furnace igniting within him. As he charged, emerald flare erupted from his body. Not from his hands this time, but from everywhere. A shimmering aura of green fire enveloped him, turning him into a human meteor. He didn't feel the heat, he was beyond it. He was pure, incandescent emotion. Get away from him! Izuku shrieked. He thrust both hands forward, and what came out was not a jet or a flicker, but a solid, roaring wall of green fire. It wasn't precise. It wasn't controlled. It was a chaotic, beautiful, terrifying spectacle. The wave of emerald energy slammed into the sludge villain, and the effect was instantaneous. The sludge didn't just burn, it sizzled and popped, the immense, sudden heat causing the liquid to rapidly expand and vaporize. A massive cloud of foul-smelling steam filled the underpass. The villain howled in pain and shock, its form destabilizing as large parts of its body were boiled away. The sheer force of the fiery wave knocked it back, loosening its grip on Bakugo just enough for him to gasp a precious lungful of air. But the fire didn't stop with the villain. It was wild. It spread, a curtain of green licking up the concrete walls, melting a streetlight into a drooping Dali-esque sculpture, and superheating the asphalt until it began to bubble. Civilians screamed and scrambled back, shielding their faces from the intense wave of heat. Izuku had created a momentary reprieve for Bakugo, but he had also turned the entire underpass into a death trap. He was a hero and a hazard, all in one explosive, uncontrolled burst. He stumbled to a halt, the fire dying down as his initial surge of adrenaline began to ebb. The backlash hit him like a physical blow. His vision swam. A wave of nausea rolled through him, and his skin felt like it was on fire, not from an external source, but from the inside out. His uniform was smoking, and the skin on his arms, where the fire had been most intense, was an angry, blistering red. The villain, enraged and diminished, began to coalesce again, its eyes fixing on the swaying, exhausted boy. You little brat! I'll kill you! Izuku was spent. He had nothing left. He had shot his one, reckless bolt, and now he was defenseless. He closed his eyes, bracing for the inevitable. Suddenly, a shadow fell over him. I really am pathetic. A voice, deep and resonant as a thunderclap, echoed through the underpass. I admonish others, yet I wasn't putting what I said into practice. Izuku cracked his eyes open. A colossal figure stood between him and the villain, his back to Izuku. Two iconic tufts of blonde hair stood tall, a silhouette of hope against the swirling steam and green embers. Pros are always risking their lives, All Might declared, his signature smile a beacon in the gloom. Detroit. Smash! A hurricane of pure air pressure ripped through the underpass, scattering the sludge villain into a million harmless droplets. The force of the blow changed the weather, clouds parting above as a sudden downpour began to fall, sizzling on the hot asphalt and dousing the last of Izuku's lingering green flames. The crisis was over. In the aftermath, Izuku was mercilessly scolded by the pro-heroes for his recklessness, for endangering himself and the public. Bakugo, once he was cleared by the paramedics, stormed over to him, his face a mask of fury. Deku! He screamed, jabbing a finger in Izuku's chest. What the hell was that? You could have boiled me alive! You think you're a hero, you uncontrolled freak? You're just a menace. He was alive, he was breathing, and he was absolutely livid that he had been saved by the one person whose power he viewed with such contemptuous frustration. Izuku didn't have the energy to respond. He just stood there, trembling, the sting of his burns a dull throb beneath the overwhelming shame. He had acted, but it was a disaster. He hadn't been a hero. He'd been a natural catastrophe in a school uniform. He didn't see the figure watching him from the edge of the crowd. All Might, in his true, skeletal form, leaned against the wall, a trickle of blood dripping from his mouth. He wasn't looking at the cheering crowd or the grateful reporters. His piercing blue eyes were fixed on the small, green-haired boy who was being dressed down by the heroes. Toshinori Yagi had seen something extraordinary. He had seen a boy with no control, no training, and a quirk that was actively harming him, run into a situation that had made seasoned pros hesitate. He had seen reckless power, yes. He had seen a lack of discipline that was terrifying. But beneath all of that, he had seen the incandescent, undeniable, and utterly pure heart of a true hero. A different kind of spark. And in that moment, a desperate, dangerous idea began to form in the mind of the symbol of peace. An idea that could either create the world's greatest hero, or unleash an uncontrollable new sun upon it. The walk home was a blurry funeral procession for a dream. Izuku's feet moved with a leaden, mechanical rhythm, his gaze fixed on the cracks in the pavement, as if they were fissures in his own soul. The cheers from the crowd and the flashes of news cameras had faded into a dull, throbbing hum in his ears, drowned out by the much louder chorus of his own failure. He'd been praised by a few bystanders. "That was amazing, kid!" a woman with a cat-like quirk had said. "You were so brave!" But her words felt hollow, a paper-thin comfort against the granite reality of his actions. He hadn't been brave, he'd been stupid. The pro-hero's stern lectures echoed with far more authority. "What were you thinking? You're lucky you didn't get everyone killed. Leave hero work to the professionals, son." But the sharpest condemnation, the one that twisted like a knife in his gut, had come from Bakugo. After being cleared by the paramedics, his face smudged with soot and sludge, Bakugo had stomped over to him, his crimson eyes burning with a unique blend of fury and humiliation. "I didn't need your help," he had snarled, his voice a low, dangerous rasp. It wasn't the usual explosive rage. This was something colder, more profound. "I had him. You just got in the way with your stupid, flashy light show." He jabbed a finger hard into Izuku's chest, right over his heart. "You think that makes you a hero? Running in like a maniac, setting the whole street on fire? You're not a hero, Deku. You're just a glorified forest fire. A disaster waiting for a place to happen. Stay the hell out of my way." With that, he had turned and stalked off, leaving Izuku to drown in the silence. A disaster waiting for a place to happen. The words clung to him, a shroud of shame. Bakugo was right. All his life, he had dreamed of saving people with a smile, just like All Might. Today, he'd had the power to act, and all he'd done was create a bigger mess, becoming another problem the real heroes had to solve. The sting of his burns was a faint echo of the searing self-loathing that now consumed him. The brilliant green fire felt less like a gift and more like a curse, a chain that tethered him to destruction. He was so lost in his miserable thoughts that he took a wrong turn, finding himself on a deserted side street just as dusk began to settle. He was about to turn back when a voice boomed from behind him, a voice so loud and familiar it seemed to shake the very atoms of the air. "I am here!" Izuku yelped, spinning around so fast he nearly tripped over his own feet. There, emerging from the alleyway he just passed, was All Might. Not a picture, not a video, but the man himself, in all his sun-drenched, muscular glory. His signature smile was plastered on his face, but it didn't seem as bright as usual. It was tight, strained, and his piercing blue eyes were not twinkling with mirth. They were fixed on Izuku with an unnerving intensity. "Hey, All Might!" Izuku squeaked, his mind going into full fandom meltdown despite the crushing weight on his spirit. What are you doing here? Can I get an autograph? On my notebook? Oh, wait, it's probably ruined from the, He trailed off, gesturing vaguely towards his singed and water-damaged backpack. "There will be time for that later, young man," All Might said, his voice losing its bombastic edge and settling into a stern, serious tone. He took a step forward, and the sheer force of his presence made Izuku feel like he was shrinking. "We need to talk." Before Izuku could process what was happening, All Might gestured for him to follow, leading him through a labyrinth of back alleys and up a rusty service staircase to the roof of a nondescript office building. The wind was stronger up here, whipping at Izuku's scorched uniform and carrying the distant symphony of the city. All Might walked to the edge of the roof, his cape snapping dramatically behind him. He stood there for a long moment, a giant silhouette against the bruised purple sky. Izuku waited, trembling, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. "What you did today," All Might began, his voice a low rumble, "was unequivocally foolish. Incredibly so." The words, coming from his idol, hit Izuku harder than any physical blow. "You ran headfirst into a volatile situation with a powerful villain that had already rendered several pro-heroes ineffective." All Might continued, turning to face him. The smile was completely gone now, replaced by the grim visage of a seasoned warrior. "Your quirk, while potent, was uncontrolled. You endangered not only your own life, but the life of the hostage you were trying to save, and the lives of every civilian and hero in the immediate vicinity. The property damage from your flare will cost the city millions to repair. Had Backdraft not been on the scene to contain it, your reckless act could have sparked a city block fire." Each word was a measured, heavy stone, building a wall of shame around Izuku. He couldn't look up. He just stared at his worn-out red shoes, his vision blurring with tears he refused to let fall. Everything his hero was saying was true. He was a menace. A liability. "I am not telling you this to crush you, young man." All Might's tone softened slightly. "I am telling you this because you need to understand the immense responsibility that comes with great power. Your heart may be heroic, but heroic intent without discipline is just another word for chaos." There was a pause, filled only by the whisper of the wind. "But," All Might said, and Izuku finally dared to look up. The hero's expression had changed. There was a flicker of something else in his eyes now, a deep, searching curiosity. "There was one thing I didn't understand. The pros were there. We were all held back, waiting for the right tool for the job. You have a powerful quirk, yes, but you know better than anyone how dangerous and uncontrolled it is. You knew the risks to yourself and others. So tell me, young man, why did you run in?" The question pierced through Izuku's shame. Why? He searched for a grand, heroic answer, but there wasn't one. There was only the simple, terrifying truth. "I don't know," he stammered, his voice thick with emotion. My body, it just moved on its own." He looked down at his bandaged hands, then up at All Might, his green eyes wide and earnest. "I saw him. Kaken, he was suffocating. And his eyes, he looked like he was asking for help. And the next thing I knew, I was running. I couldn't just stand there and watch him die." The confession hung in the air, raw and desperate. Izuku clenched his fists, the motion sending a fresh sting through his burns. "I know it was stupid. I know I made things worse, but my quirk, it's always been tied to this feeling. This desperate need to do something. And I hate it. I hate that I can't control it. I hate that it hurts me. I hate that it scares my mom. And I hate that today, when it mattered most, all it did was make me a bigger danger." A tear finally escaped, tracing a clean path through the grime on his cheek. He stood there, exposed and broken before his lifelong idol. All Might watched him, his expression unreadable. He seemed to look right through Izuku, at the fiery, chaotic core of him. The hero nodded slowly, a deep, thoughtful sound rumbling in his chest. "I see," he said softly, and then, something impossible happened. A cloud of steam suddenly erupted from All Might's body, billowing around him like a staged magician's trick. It was dense and hot, smelling faintly of iron. Izuku stumbled back, shielding his eyes. When the steam cleared, the colossal symbol of peace was gone. In his place stood a man who was his polar opposite. He was horrifyingly gaunt, a living skeleton with sunken cheeks, wild, shadowed eyes, and limp, deflated bangs of blonde hair. He looked like a man who had been starved for a decade. He was wearing the same cargo pants, but his white t-shirt, now ridiculously oversized, hung off his skeletal frame. A thin trickle of blood dripped from the corner of his mouth as he coughed, a wet, rattling sound that spoke of deep, internal damage. Izuku's brain short-circuited. He stared, his mouth agape, cycling through every possible explanation: a clone, a shape-shifting villain, a hallucination brought on by heat stroke. Wahoo, you're not All Might! He finally managed to stammer, pointing a trembling finger. You're an imposter! A fake! The skeletal man sighed, a weary, rattling sound. He lifted his shirt, and Izuku's protests died in his throat. On the man's left side was a wound so horrific it looked like a starburst of scar tissue. It was a deep, crater-like puckering of mangled flesh, purple and red and grotesquely knotted, a testament to a catastrophic injury that should have killed any normal person. This is what happens when you push yourself too far, kid, the man said, his voice now thin and reedy, but unmistakably belonging to the same person. 5 years ago, a nasty fight with a villain you've probably never heard of. It cost me my stomach and one of my lungs. I've been wasting away ever since. He let the shirt fall. The symbol of peace, the guy who saves everyone with a fearless smile, can now only do his hero work for about 3 hours a day. The rest of the time I'm this. Izuku felt the world tilt on its axis. All Might, the invincible, untouchable pillar of society, was broken. Wounded. Mortal. The smile? Toshinori Yagi, for that was his name, continued, a bitter edge to his voice. That's just to hide the fear. To hide the pressure. And to hide this. He coughed again, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. He proceeded to tell Izuku everything. He spoke of his quirk, a power unlike any other, passed down from one generation to the next like a sacred torch. A power that stockpiled strength, growing with each new user. He called it One for All. I've been searching for a successor, Toshinori said, his gaze heavy. And then, today, I saw you, a boy with a powerful quirk he couldn't control, who didn't hesitate to rush into danger that made even seasoned pros flinch. You ran into the fire, not because you thought you could win, but because your spirit demanded it. I saw true heroism in you. Izuku's heart hammered. He knew what was coming. It was the dream of every child. Young man, Toshinori said, his voice regaining a sliver of its former power. You, too, can become a hero. I deem you worthy of my power. My quirk is yours to inherit. For a moment, pure, unadulterated elation soared through Izuku. The greatest hero in the world had chosen him. Him. A disaster waiting to happen. It was everything he'd ever wanted. But then, the cold reality of Toshinori's next words doused that fledgling hope. However, the skeletal hero said, his tone turning gravely serious. For you, this offer is not a gift. It is a monumental, life-threatening risk. Izuku blinked. A risk? What do you mean? Toshinori leaned against the rooftop railing, the metal groaning under his slight weight. One for All is not an empty vessel, kid. It doesn't just grant power, it magnifies what is already there. It takes the user's innate potential, their strength, their speed, their spirit, and amplifies it 1,000-fold. He locked eyes with Izuku, and the intensity in them was terrifying. That includes amplifying a user's existing quirk. He paused, letting the weight of that statement sink in. Your quirk, Emerald Flare, is already a furnace directly linked to your emotional state. An unstable, volatile reactor you can barely contain. Giving you One for All would be like trying to house a second sun inside the first. It would be like pouring rocket fuel into a bonfire that's already burning down the forest. Izuku felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. Think about it, son. Toshinori pressed, his voice low and urgent. We've seen what happens when your desperation spikes. You unleash a torrent of fire that your body can't handle, burning yourself from the strain. Now, imagine that same emotional surge amplified by One for All. The quirk would feed your fire, making it exponentially hotter and more powerful. That surge of power would then feed back into your emotional state, creating a catastrophic, self-perpetuating loop of power and emotion. He gestured with a skeletal hand. The result? Your body, which already has a subpar tolerance for its own heat, would become the epicenter of an uncontrollable stellar explosion. It wouldn't just break your bones. It could very well incinerate you from the inside out. Turn you to ash in an instant. This has never been done before. I have no idea what the true outcome would be. I would be asking you to become a walking paradox, a hero with the power to level cities by accident. The very thing you fear you already are, magnified to a global scale. The hope in Izuku's chest died, replaced by an icy dread. He looked down at his bandaged hands. All this time, he thought his problem was a lack of control. A personal failing. But All Might was telling him that the ultimate quirk wouldn't fix that. It would make it infinitely worse. It was a death sentence wrapped in a hero's cape. He felt a wave of despair so profound it was nauseating. So I'm just stuck? He whispered, his voice cracking. I'm always going to be this fire hazard? Unable to be the hero I want to be because my own power is a danger to everyone? The dream was truly dead now. He had a powerful quirk, but it was a defective one. And the one thing that could make him a true hero was also the one thing that would surely kill him. It was the universe's cruelest joke. He sank to his knees, the rough concrete of the rooftop biting into his trousers. This was his reality. A boy with 2 suns inside him, destined only to be consumed by their light. He sat there for a long moment, adrift in his misery. He thought of his mother's worried face every time she checked his hands for burns. He thought of the expensive, fire-retardant clothes she bought him, her love manifesting as a constant, anxious precaution. He thought of Bakugo's endless taunts, not about weakness, but about his lack of control. He thought of the searing pain in his arms after the USJ, the feeling of his own gift turning against him. His whole life had been a battle against himself. And then, through the fog of despair, a new thought began to form. It was a tiny spark at first, as small and defiant as the first flicker of his quirk had been all those years ago. Control. That was the word. The thing he'd always lacked. He'd always seen his fire as something separate, a wild animal he had to cage. He'd seen OFA as just more power. Another, bigger animal to add to the zoo. But what if he was looking at it all wrong? He slowly lifted his head, a new light dawning in his eyes. What if One for All wasn't just raw power? It was a legacy. A lineage of heroes who had mastered it, wielded it, controlled it. It was power, yes, but it was also discipline incarnate. It was a quirk that required a vessel of immense physical and mental fortitude. What if One for All wasn't the fuel for the fire, but the forge? The thought electrified him. The power to temper his flame. The strength to build a body that could finally withstand the heat. The sheer force of will, passed down through generations, to provide the focus he so desperately needed. It wouldn't be an amplifier for his weakness. It would be the ultimate tool to conquer it. It was a path. Not an easy one, perhaps not even a survivable one. But it was a path. He stood up, his legs shaky but his resolve hardening like steel in a crucible. He looked Toshinori Yagi in the eye, and the skeletal hero saw the despair in the boy's gaze replaced by a terrifying, unshakable determination. I'll do it, Izuku said, his voice quiet but ringing with conviction. Toshinori blinked. Kid, did you hear anything I just said? This could kill you. I heard you, Izuku said, clenching his fists at his sides. The bandages crinkled. You said it was a risk. You didn't say it was impossible. He took a deep breath, the cool night air feeling clean in his lungs. All my life, I've been afraid of my own power. I've been trying to smother it, to run from it. But I can't. It's a part of me. You're offering me more power, and that scares me more than anything. But you're also offering me a chance. A chance to finally build a body, a will, strong enough to master myself. To forge a vessel that can contain the heat. He looked at his hands, no longer with fear, but with a newfound purpose. I don't want your power just to be a flashy hero, All Might. I want it because I have to take it. If One for All is the only path to finally gaining control, to finally becoming the kind of hero who can save someone without burning everything down around them, then I have to try. He bowed deeply, a gesture of profound respect and acceptance. Please, All Might. Allow me to carry the weight of this power. Allow me to try to tame it. Toshinori stared at the boy before him, utterly speechless. He had expected tears, fear, a sensible refusal. He had not expected this. This quiet, resolute insanity. He saw a boy who wasn't looking for a shortcut to greatness, but who was willing to climb the most dangerous mountain in the world because it was the only way to conquer the storm within himself. A slow smile spread across Tashinori's gaunt face. It was the first genuine, hopeful smile Izuku had seen on him. A foolish, noble, utterly insane boy, he whispered to himself, a dry chuckle escaping his lips. He coughed, but this time it sounded less like death and more like life. You've got a long, painful road ahead of you, kid. A road that starts tomorrow morning, at sunrise. He gave Izuku an address. Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. Where something you don't mind ruining. As Izuku finally made his way home, hours later, the world felt different. The weight on his shoulders hadn't vanished. In fact, it had increased 1,000-fold. It was the weight of a sacred legacy, the weight of a deadly risk. The weight of 2 sons, one inherited and one innate, now resting entirely in his trembling, bandaged hands. It was a terrifying, crushing weight. But for the first time in his life, beneath the fear and the uncertainty, Izuku Midoriya felt the glimmer of hope that he might just be strong enough to bear it. The address All Might had given him led to hell, or at least its coastal suburb. Dagoba Municipal Beach Park was less a park and more a coastal landfill, a testament to decades of illegal dumping and oceanic indifference. The rising sun, which should have been a glorious symbol of a new day, instead cast long, sickly shadows over mountains of rusted appliances, tangled fishing nets, and forgotten furniture. The air was a putrid cocktail of salt, decay, and rust, a smell that clung to the back of the throat. Izuku stood at the edge of the disaster zone, a small, trembling figure in a brand-new tracksuit. The sheer scale of the task was soul-crushing. It wasn't just trash. It was a scar upon the earth. "Good morning, young Midoriya," a booming voice declared. All Might, in his muscle form, stood atop a teetering mountain of discarded refrigerators, his grin a beacon of impossible optimism in the wasteland. A perfect day for some civic improvement. Izuku could only stare, his jaw slack. All Might, all of this? You want me to clean all of this? Indeed! The hero roared, leaping from his perch to land before Izuku with a ground-shaking thud that sent a flock of gulls scattering. This is your gym. Your crucible. Your path to UA, he gestured grandly at the junkyard sea. This is the American dream plan for success. Izuku's heart sank into his sneakers. But this would take an army of heavy machinery. It's impossible. All Might's smile tightened slightly. He deflated with a hiss of steam, shrinking down into the skeletal form of Tashinori Yagi before Izuku's eyes. The morning light was not kind to him, accentuating the hollows of his cheeks and the profound weariness in his eyes. It looks impossible now, Tashinori said, his voice a quiet rasp against the sound of the waves. But in 10 months, this beach will be pristine. And you will be the one to do it. This isn't just about moving trash, kid. It's about forging a vessel. He poked a bony finger into Izuku's soft midsection, making the boy flinch. Your body right now is a teacup. Trying to pour the ocean of one for all into it would shatter you into a million pieces. You need to rebuild yourself, from the sinew to the bone, into a chalice worthy of the power. This labor will do that. Every rusted car frame you drag, every waterlogged sofa you haul, will pack on the muscle you so desperately need. He then fixed Izuku with a gaze so intense it felt physical. But that is only half the battle. The easier half, in your case, Tashinori pointed to a heap of tangled, rusted rebar. Your other task, the far more critical one, is to master the fire you already possess. This beach isn't just your gymnasium, young Midoriya. It's your monastery. He explained the second, more vital purpose of the training. This wasn't just mindless labor. It was a 10-month-long moving meditation. Every action had to be deliberate. Every moment was an opportunity for control. Your quirk, Emerald Flare, is a tantrum, Tashinori stated bluntly, the words sharp and true. It's the desperate shriek of your emotions given form. We need to turn that shriek into a whisper. A tool. You will not use your fire to wantonly destroy this junk. That would be easy, and it would teach you nothing. Instead, you will learn to use it with precision. He picked up a small, rusted metal plate. See this? When you are strong enough to lift the washing machine it's attached to, you will not just throw it in the pile. You will use a small, controlled burst of your flame, no bigger than your thumb, to heat the bolt holding it on until it glows red, allowing you to unscrew it. You will use focused jets of heat to melt through plastic bindings without setting the whole pile ablaze. You will learn to treat your quirk not as an emotional outburst, but as a scalpel. A welder's torch, a key. Izuku stared at him, overwhelmed. Build a hero's body and achieve a monk's level of emotional discipline simultaneously? It felt like being asked to climb two different mountains at the same time. Every time you feel frustrated, Toshinori continued, his voice relentless. Every time your muscles scream and you want to give up, your fire will want to surge. That is the moment of truth. You must breathe. You must focus. You must separate the feeling in your heart from the power in your hands. The fire is a tool, not a tantrum. Say it. The fire is a tool, not a tantrum. Izuku repeated, the words feeling foreign and flimsy on his tongue. Again, Toshinori commanded. The fire is a tool, not a tantrum. Good, he said, a grim sort of satisfaction on his face. Your training begins now. Your goal is to clear this entire section of the beach before the UA entrance exams in 10 months, and your first task. He pointed to a refrigerator half buried in the sand, its door hanging open like a broken jaw. Is that? Izuku looked at the fridge. It looked back, silently mocking him. He tried to budge it. It didn't move. He wrapped his arms around it, and heaved with all his might, his face turning beet red. The fridge remained stubbornly planted in its sandy grave. Toshinori simply watched, arms crossed. Having trouble? It's so heavy! Izuku gasped. Then get stronger, was the simple, brutal reply. Your clock is ticking, young Midoriya. The first 3 months were a symphony of agony. Izuku's life became a grueling cycle of school, beach, collapse, repeat. He'd wake up before dawn, his entire body screaming in protest, and meet Toshinori at the beach. He would spend hours hauling junk, his muscles tearing and rebuilding in a constant, painful cycle. He followed the American dream plan to the letter, a diet and workout regimen so intense it left him seeing stars. He learned the geography of pain intimately. There was the sharp, grinding pain of his joints, the deep, burning ache of his muscles, and the stinging, angry pain of his own quirk. His attempts at fire control were, initially, an unmitigated disaster. In the first week, exhausted and frustrated after an hour of failing to move a pile of waterlogged tires, he felt that familiar swell of panic in his chest. I can't do this. It's too much. And just as Toshinori had predicted, the fire surged. An uncontrolled wave of emerald flare erupted from his hands, not at the tires, but at a nearby pile of plastic refuse. The plastic didn't just melt, it ignited into a column of thick, black, toxic smoke. No! Toshinori roared, transforming into all might in a puff of steam and using a single, powerful clap of his hands to snuff out the fire with a gust of wind. He loomed over the coughing, sputtering Izuku, his face a mask of disappointment. What did I tell you, young man? A tool, not a tantrum. Izuku, his hands blistered and his lungs full of poison smoke, could only stammer apologies. The shame was a physical weight, heavier than any refrigerator. He tried to be more careful, but his body was a traitor. A few weeks later, while trying to drag a massive, rust-eaten stove, his foot slipped on a patch of wet seaweed. A jolt of surprise and fear shot through him, and a reflexive jet of green flame shot from his foot, vaporizing the old sneaker he was wearing and giving him a nasty burn on his toes. He spent the next 3 days limping, a constant, painful reminder of his failure. His mother, Inko, was beside herself with worry. He'd come home each night looking like he'd gone 10 rounds with a cement mixer, covered in scratches, bruises, and the occasional minor burn he couldn't hide. He was eating 3 times his normal amount, but was so exhausted he'd often fall asleep face first into his katsudan. Izuku, honey, are you sure this is safe? She'd ask, her voice laced with the familiar terror he hated causing. She'd be gently applying burn ointment to his knuckles, her touch featherlight. This special training program, it seems so extreme. It's fine, Mom, really. He'd lie, forcing a smile that felt brittle. All Might, my mentor, he knows what he's doing. I'm getting stronger. And I'm learning. But was he? The muscles were growing, yes. A wiry strength was slowly replacing his softness. But his control over emerald flare felt as distant as ever. He was terrified of it. He started avoiding using it altogether, opting for sheer, back-breaking manual labor even when a small, hot flame would have made the job easier. He treated his quirk like a caged beast, ignoring it in the hopes it would stay asleep. Toshinori noticed. One evening, as Izuku was trying to rip a rusted steel panel off a car door with his bare hands, his knuckles bleeding, Toshinori stopped him. "This is foolishness," the skeletal hero said flatly. "You are choosing the hard path out of fear. You will never master the fire if you refuse to even try to light the match. But every time I try, I mess up," Izuku cried out, his frustration finally boiling over. "I burn myself, I set things on fire, I make it worse. It's better if I just don't use it." "No," Toshinori said, his voice quiet but firm. "It is better if you learn. Failure is a part of that process. The most important part. Now stop acting like a child who is afraid of the dark and face your own shadow." He pointed back to the stove Izuku had burned his foot on weeks ago. "Your next task is to dismantle that stove. Bolt by bolt. And you will not lay a single hand on it until your flame does the work for you." The breakthrough came during the 5th month. The stove had become his white whale. For a week, he had done nothing but stand before it, trying to summon a small, controlled flame. Every attempt was either a pathetic, heatless flicker or a dangerous, uncontrolled surge that forced him to jump back. His frustration was a physical thing, a ball of hot acid in his stomach. He was on the verge of giving up. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the beach that now looked significantly, if not impressively, cleaner. He was tired, hungry, and his spirit was frayed. He could feel the familiar prickle of heat behind his eyes, the precursor to an emotional detonation. "This is pointless. I can't do it. I'm just a menace." Kaken was right. "Breathe, young Midoriya," Toshinori's voice cut through his spiraling thoughts. The hero stood a few feet away, his expression calm and steady. He didn't yell. He didn't scold. "You're thinking about the outcome," Toshinori said softly. "You're thinking about failing. You're thinking about what Bakugo said. You are feeding the fire with everything except what it needs. Focus." He guided Izuku through the breathing exercise, his voice a steady metronome. "In for 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold it for 7, feel the air fill your lungs, calm your heart, 6, 7. Out for 8, release the frustration, release the fear, 5, 6, 7, 8. They did this 10 times. Izuku's frantic heartbeat slowly settled. The acidic ball of frustration in his stomach began to dissolve. "Now," Toshinori said, his voice a near whisper. "Look at the stove. Don't see it as an obstacle. Don't see it as a symbol of your failure. See it for what it is. A thing made of metal. Look at the top left bolt. See the rust. See the way it connects the enamel plate to the frame. That is your entire world right now. Nothing else exists." Izuku focused. He shut out the sound of the waves, the smell of the salt, the memory of his past failures. There was only the bolt. "The fire is not your anger," Toshinori murmured. "It is not your fear. It is a tool. It exists to serve a purpose. Its purpose, right now, is to heat that single bolt. Nothing more. It does not need to be a bonfire. It only needs to be a candle." Izuku took one last, deep breath. He held out his right hand, palm up. He didn't think about unleashing his power. He thought about the bolt. He pictured the metal glowing a dull cherry red. He envisioned the heat, not as a destructive wave, but as a focused, gentle touch. He reached out, not with his emotions but with his will, and it happened. A single, perfect flame bloomed in his palm. It was no bigger than his thumb, a silent, steady teardrop of brilliant green light. It didn't waver. It didn't surge. It just was. Izuku's eyes widened, but he fought down the surge of elation. He held his breath, slowly moving his hand towards the stove. He brought the tip of the emerald flame to the head of the bolt. It hissed softly. He held it there, his arm trembling not with strain, but with the sheer effort of maintaining his focus. The mantra echoed in his head, a tool, not a tantrum. A tool, not a tantrum. Seconds stretched into an eternity. Slowly, miraculously, the bolt began to glow, first a dull brown, then a faint orange, then a brilliant, cherry red. Izuku extinguished the flame with a thought, a clean, sharp snuff. He fumbled for the wrench Toshinori had given him, fitted over the glowing bolt, and turned. With a rusty groan, the bolt gave way. It was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. He stared at the bolt in his hand, then at his own palm, which was tingling but not burned. A huge, watery grin split his face. He had done it. He had controlled it. He looked up at Toshinori. The skeletal hero was smiling, a wide, genuine smile of pure pride. "Good," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That's one. Now do the rest." The last 5 months were a transformation. The breakthrough with the stove unlocked something deep within Izuku. His progress accelerated at an astonishing rate. The grueling physical labor was no longer just a pain to be endured. It was a rhythm. He learned to sync his breathing with the hauling of heavy objects, his movements becoming fluid and efficient. The wiry muscle he developed solidified into dense, powerful cords. He was still lean, but now he was lean like a wolf, all coiled potential and honed strength. His mastery over emerald flare grew in leaps and bounds. Dismantling the stove had been the first lesson. The entire beach was the final exam. He became an artist of precise destruction and creation. He would use a thin, whip-like lash of green fire to snap rusted chains. He'd use a wide, gentle wave of low heat to melt away thick grease and grime from engine blocks. He learned to create a gauntlet of solid-looking flame around his hand, using its intense, focused heat to weld broken pieces of metal together for easier hauling. He was no longer afraid of his quirk. He was beginning to understand it. It was still tied to his emotions, but he'd learned which emotions to feed it. Not fear, not panic. He fed it determination. He fueled it with focus. He powered it with the calm, quiet pride of a job well done. His control was still imperfect. A moment of shock could still cause a dangerous flare-up. But the beast was no longer wild. It was beginning to answer to its master. On the final day, 10 months to the day from when he started, Izuku stood on the edge of the beach as the sun began to rise. It was clean, impossibly, miraculously, breathtakingly clean. The mountains of junk were gone. The sand, washed by the tides and cleared by his hands, stretched out in a pristine, golden expanse. The rising sun glinted off the gentle waves. It smelled only of salt and clean sea air. Izuku was a different person. His tracksuit hung off a frame that was all hard lines and defined muscle. His hands were a tapestry of calluses and faded white scars, a map of his ordeal. He stood tall, his posture straight, his gaze calm and steady. A familiar skeletal figure came to stand beside him. Toshinori looked out at the clean beach, and for a moment, he was too choked up to speak. He pulled out his phone and showed Izuku a picture he'd taken on that first day. A picture of a small, terrified boy standing before a mountain of filth. "Look at you," Toshinori said, his voice thick. He pulled up a new picture he had just secretly taken of Izuku standing there now, silhouetted against the dawn. He put the two images side by side. The contrast was staggering. "You did it, my boy. You did good." Tears welled in Izuku's eyes. He climbed atop the last remaining object, a single, clean refrigerator that he had left as a monument, and he screamed. It was not a scream of fear or rage. It was a roar of pure, unadulterated triumph, a sound that echoed across the clean sand and out over the open ocean. Toshinori, in his muscle form, recorded it, a massive tear rolling down his own cheek. "Yeah!" he bellowed. "A true hero!" Later, as the sun climbed higher, they stood on the cleared promenade. The mood was quiet, solemn. The time had come. "It's time, young Midoriya," Toshinori said, reverting to his true form. "For all your hard work, for all your sacrifice, it's time for your reward." Izuku's heart hammered. This was it. Now for how to pass it on. Toshinori mused. "They say there are many ways, but the most traditional is, well..." He plucked a single strand of his iconic blonde hair. "Eat this." Izuku's brain screeched to a halt. "Huh!" After a moment of flustered, panicked confusion, Izuku, grimacing, took the strand of hair. It represented a legacy, a hope, a terrifying power. It was the key to his future. He closed his eyes, pinched his nose, and swallowed. For a second, nothing happened. He blinked, looking at his hands. I don't feel any different, Toshinori smiled. It'll take a moment to digest. It needs to be incorporated into your system, and then it hit. It did not feel like power. It felt like lightning. It felt like a dam breaking. A torrent of pure, raw energy flooded every cell of his being. It was a roaring, deafening rush, a physical sensation like being plugged into a power plant. He felt the ghosts of the previous users, not as distinct personalities, but as a chorus of willpower, a tidal wave of determination and sacrifice washing through him. And this immense, external power slammed directly into the core of his own internal one. The sun met the sun. The placid, controlled ember of emerald flare he had so painstakingly learned to command was hit by the full force of One for All's amplification. It was like a pilot light being struck by a bolt of lightning. FOM. An uncontrollable, internal inferno erupted inside him. He didn't burst into flames externally. This was worse. It was all happening on the inside. A supernova detonated in his soul. He felt the roar of 8 lifetimes of power stoking his own fire into a frenzy. The feedback loop Toshinori had warned him about engaged with the force of a train crash. OFA amplified his shock and awe, which amplified his flame. The surge of inner flame amplified his panic, which was then amplified again by OFA. Pain. Blinding, searing, all-consuming pain. It felt like every vein and artery in his body had been turned into a filament of burning green light. A deafening roar filled his ears, a combination of the OFA chorus and the sound of his own power raging out of control within him. His vision went white, then green, then white again. He felt a pressure building behind his eyes, in his chest, in his skull, as if his very atoms were trying to fly apart. It was too much. Too much light, too much sound, too much power, too much feeling. His last conscious thought was a single, terrifying word: overload. Then, the world went black. Izuku crumpled to the ground, his body twitching. Faint wisps of green steam rose from his skin, and the air around him shimmered with intense heat. Toshinori rushed to his side, his face a mask of horror. He had expected a jolt, a surge of power, maybe the boy would pass out from excitement. He had not expected this. He could feel the raw, untamed energy radiating from the unconscious boy. He had witnessed the moment the two suns collided, and the explosion, even contained within that newly forged vessel, was far more violent than he had ever conceived. He knelt, placing a trembling hand on Izuku's forehead. The boy was burning up, his body racked with the backlash of 2 immense quirks at war with each other. "My boy," Toshinori whispered, his pride for moments before curdling into a deep, profound fear. He had done it. He had passed on his sacred trust. But in doing so, he realized with chilling certainty that he hadn't just given a key to a worthy successor. He had armed a time bomb. And the countdown had just begun. The morning of the UA High entrance exam dawned cold and clear. Izuku stood before his full-length mirror, not muttering, not fidgeting, but breathing. In for 4, hold for 7, out for 8. The mantra was a lifeline in the tumultuous sea of his nerves. He looked different. The boy who had stood here a year ago was a ghost, a soft, round-faced child with haunted eyes. The boy in the mirror now was forged from a different metal. His tracksuit, once loose, now fit snugly over a physique of lean, corded muscle etched by 10 months of relentless toil. His face was leaner, his jawline sharper, and the perpetual fear in his eyes had been tempered into a steely, focused calm. He was a weapon that had been through the fire, polished by grit and pain. His hands, however, told the truer story. They were a road map of his journey, crisscrossed with a fine network of silvery white scars from 1,000 minor burns, the skin of his palms and knuckles tough with calluses. They were the hands of a laborer, a blacksmith, a boy who had wrestled with his own soul and bore the marks of the struggle. "Izuku, honey? Are you ready?" His mother's voice floated through the door, gentle but taut with a familiar thread of anxiety. He opened the door and gave her a small, confident smile. "Ready as I'll ever be, Mom." Inko's eyes welled up instantly. She saw the new strength in him, the quiet confidence, but a mother's gaze pierces deeper. She also saw the faint shimmer of heat haze rising from his shoulders, a telltale sign of his suppressed excitement, his internal furnace already warming up. She fussed with the collar of his tracksuit, her hands trembling slightly. "Just be careful, Izuku," she whispered, her voice thick. "Don't push yourself too hard. No matter what happens today, I am so proud of you. I will, Mom," he said, and for once he felt the words were true. He wasn't the same fragile boy who made her worry with every emotional outburst. He had a measure of control now. A fragile, hard-won control. As he walked towards the UA campus, the towering H-shaped building a symbol of all his dreams, he felt a phantom weight in his stomach where he'd swallowed All Might's hair. The power of One for All was a silent, sleeping giant within him. After the terrifying overload on the beach, All Might had been adamant. "You are not to touch that power, do you hear me, young Midoriya?" Toshinori had stressed, his face pale with remembered fear. "Not one iota of it. Your body is a vessel, yes, but it's a vessel fresh from the kiln. It still has fractures. Pouring One for All into it now, even a drop, will shatter it. You passed the physical trial. Today, you pass the control trial. You will rely only on what you have mastered, Emerald Flare. Is that understood?" "Understood," Izuku had promised. And he meant it. Today was not about the inherited son. It was about proving he could command his own. The orientation hall was massive, buzzing with the nervous energy of hundreds of aspiring heroes. Izuku found a seat, his heart thrumming a nervous rhythm. He saw the boy with engines in his calves from the school gates, scolding another student with rigid, chopping hand gestures. He saw a girl with rosy cheeks and a warm, bubbly aura, nervously clasping her hands together. And then, he felt a familiar, aggressive presence slide into the seat beside him. So the fire hazard actually showed up. Bakugo sneered, not even bothering to look at him. His crimson eyes were fixed on the stage, radiating an aura of supreme, arrogant confidence. "Try not to burn the whole exam site down, Deku. It'd be a pain to have to reschedule because of your pathetic lack of control." The insult was familiar, but the tone was different. There was no pity, no condescension. There was only the grating annoyance of a rival he was forced to acknowledge. Bakugo had seen Izuku's transformation over the past year. He'd seen the skinny weakling become a hardened physical specimen. He didn't know the reason, but he recognized the result. Izuku was no longer a pebble. He was a piece of unstable emotional ordnance, and Bakugo couldn't wait to prove he was the superior explosive. "I'll be fine, Kaken," Izuku said, his voice quiet but steady, refusing to rise to the bait. Present Mix's booming presentation began, explaining the practical exam. They would be fighting robots, 1, 2, and 3 pointers, in a massive mock cityscape. Izuku's analytical mind immediately kicked in, his fear momentarily forgotten as he absorbed the details. Different point values mean different levels of armor and weaponry. A 1-pointer might be susceptible to a quick, low-heat melt at a crucial joint. A 3-pointer will likely require a sustained, high-intensity blast, which will tax my stamina and increase my body temperature faster. I'll have to be efficient. A tool, not a tantrum. As President Mike finished, the boy with the engines, Tenya Ida, shot to his feet, demanding clarification about a fourth, unmentioned robot type and admonishing Izuku for his quiet muttering. Izuku sank in his seat, embarrassed, but the fear didn't spiral. He just took a deep breath. Focus. They were herded onto buses and taken to their assigned battle centers. Izuku found himself at the gates of Battle Center B, a sprawling, convincing replica of an urban downtown. The other examinees were a mix of intimidating figures with impressive-looking quirks and nervous wrecks. Izuku was somewhere in the middle. He stretched, feeling the solid, unfamiliar power in his limbs. He could do this. The massive gates stood before them. Everyone was tense, waiting for the signal. And start! President Mix's voice blared from hidden speakers. Everyone stood frozen for a beat, confused. What's wrong? The test started! Run! Run! The die has been cast! As the crowd surged forward, Izuku took a half-second to center himself. He could feel the excitement, the adrenaline, a dangerous fuel for his quirk. He had to channel it. A tool, not a tantrum. A tool, not a tantrum. He pushed off the ground, but as his feet left the pavement, he angled them downwards and released a controlled, percussive blast of green fire from his saws. Whoosh! He launched himself forward and over the heads of the stunned crowd, landing gracefully 50 meters inside the city. He didn't waste a moment. Rounding a corner, he came face to face with a sleek, one-point robot. It swiveled towards him, its single red optic glowing. Before it could even raise its weaponized arm, Izuku shot his right hand forward. A concentrated, pencil-thin beam of emerald fire, no thicker than his finger, erupted from his fingertip. It was a technique he'd perfected, melting bolts off car chassis. The beam struck the robot's neck joint. The metal glowed cherry red, then white, and with a wet, sizzling sound, the robot's head slid clean off its shoulders, crashing to the ground. 1 point. Izuku breathed, a small smile touching his lips. It worked. His training worked. He didn't celebrate. He was a man on a mission. He sprinted through the artificial streets, his senses on high alert. 2 more one-pointers ambushed him from an alley. He didn't stop. He vaulted into the air, twisting his body and releasing a short, wide arc of flame from his hands, a fire wave technique he'd used to clear seaweed from the beach. The emerald crescent bisected both robots at the torso. They crumpled, sparking uselessly. Total, 3 points. Body temp, 37.5 C. Minimal strain. His internal monologue was a constant stream of self-analysis, a habit ingrained by Toshinori. A much larger 2-pointer rumbled towards him. It was bulkier, with thicker armor. A pinpoint beam wouldn't be enough. Izuku slid to a halt, planting his feet. As the robot fired a volley of rubber bullets, he created a gauntlet of solid-looking green fire around his left forearm, a shimmering, semi-translucent shield of pure heat. The bullets melted into slag before they could reach him. He pushed forward, punching his flaming gauntlet straight through the robot's chest plate. The metal screamed as it was flash-melted, and the robot's internal circuitry fried with a shower of blue sparks. Total, 5 points. Body temp, 38.2 C. Moderate strain on the left arm. The gauntlet technique consumes a lot of energy. He continued his rampage. He became a blur of green fire and focused intent. He was a powerhouse, just as the outline had predicted, but a smart one. He used small bursts from his feet for propulsion, allowing him to navigate the urban environment with a parkour-like grace. He used thin, whip-like lashes of fire to disable robots from a distance, targeting exposed wiring or hydraulic lines. Other examinees started to notice. They saw the flash of emerald light down a street, and heard the shriek of melting metal. "Whoa, what is that?" one girl with extendable fingers asked, peering around a corner. "Some kid with a green fire quirk," her companion answered, ducking as a robot head flew over them. "He's tearing through them. Is he related to Endeavor?" "No way. Endeavor's fire is orange. This is different. It looks unnatural." Izuku had racked up 28 points when he started to feel the effects. A layer of sweat coated his skin, and his tracksuit was beginning to steam, the heat rising off his body in visible waves. His breathing was becoming labored. Body temp, 39 C. Entering the danger zone. Need to cool down. He saw a 3-pointer, a tank-like machine, cornering another student. This was a test of power. Izuku planted his feet, took a deep, calming breath, and focused. He clasped his hands together, channeling his energy into a single point. "Emerald Cannon!" he yelled, the name helping him focus his intent. A thick, roaring beam of concentrated green fire erupted from his hands, slamming into the 3-pointer. It was not a wild, chaotic wave. It was a focused, disciplined blast of pure thermal energy. The robot's armor glowed, then buckled, then melted into a heap of molten slag. Total, 31 points. Body temp, 40.1 C. Severe overheating. Dizziness. Vision slightly blurry. He staggered back, leaning against the wall, his body screaming in protest. The world tilted slightly. He had to stop. He had to rest. He'd done well. 31 points should be enough to pass. He'd proven he could be strong and controlled. He had passed All Might's test. and then the ground began to shake. A shadow fell over the entire city block. With a sound of grinding metal and groaning concrete, a monster rose from behind the buildings. It was the zero-pointer, a colossal robot easily 20 stories tall, a walking skyscraper of doom. "That's the zero-pointer!" someone screamed. "It's just an obstacle. Run!" And everyone did. A tide of panicked students flowed away from the mechanical titan, their survival instincts overriding any thought of heroism. Izuku, dizzy and overheated, turned to join them. His mission was complete. There was no point in fighting this thing. It was unwinnable. He took 2 steps, and then he heard a cry. "Ow! My leg!" Izuku's head snapped back. There, sprawled on the ground directly in the path of the advancing behemoth, was the girl with the rosy cheeks. A large slab of concrete had pinned her leg. She was struggling, her face pale with terror, as the zero-pointer's massive foot rose, preparing to take a step that would crush her into paste. In that instant, Izuku's world narrowed to a single point. The girl. Trapped. In danger. His training, his discipline, his careful control, all of it evaporated like dew in a furnace. The desperate, heroic instinct that had driven him to save Bakugo from the sludge villains surged to the forefront, a tidal wave of pure, unthinking compassion. The mantras vanished. The careful temperature checks were forgotten. All that remained was the screaming, undeniable need to save her. His internal furnace didn't just warm up, it went critical. A violent aura of green fire exploded around him, far more intense than anything he had yet produced. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that his own power wasn't enough. A full-power emerald cannon might dent the beast's ankle, but it wouldn't be fast enough. It wouldn't be strong enough. He needed more. He remembered Tashinori's warning, the image of his own body turning to ash. "Don't touch it. It will shatter you." He saw the girl's terrified eyes. He saw the shadow of the robot's foot begin to descend. A hero, he thought, a frantic, desperate clarity cutting through his panic, is someone who is willing to shatter for the sake of others. He made his choice. He didn't try to channel it into his legs or his fist. He knew his bones would turn to powder. He did something far more dangerous, far more intuitive. He reached deep inside himself, past the familiar, raging green sun of his own quirk, and for the first time, he willingly touched the second, sleeping sun of One for All. He didn't grasp for the whole ocean. He took a single, infinitesimal drop. A tiny sliver. And he didn't try to wield it himself. He fed it to his fire. Greawa! He let out a primal roar as the 2 powers collided within him. The sliver of OFA acted as a hyper-accelerant. His green fire, already raging from his emotional state, was supercharged, amplified 1,000-fold in an instant. Red-black lightning, the telltale sign of One for All, began to crackle and arc around his right arm, not on the surface, but within the flames themselves. His entire arm was engulfed in a vortex of power so immense it felt like it was being torn from reality. The pain was blinding, a symphony of shattering bone, tearing muscle, and flesh being incinerated from the inside out. But he grit his teeth and aimed. He pointed his arm, now a conduit for an impossible power, at the zero-pointer's head. Emerald! Overdrive! What erupted from his arm was not a beam or a wave. It was a biblical event, a colossal, roaring pillar of incandescent green fire, laced with furious, crackling tendrils of red-black lightning, tore through the sky. It was wider than a bus, a spiraling vortex of destruction that produced a sound that was both a shriek and a thunderclap. The sheer heat of it warped the air for blocks, melting the facades of nearby buildings and turning the asphalt below it into a bubbling black soup. The pillar of divine fire slammed into the zero-pointer's head. There was no clang of impact. No explosion. The robot's massive head, feet of reinforced steel and titanium, simply ceased to exist. It was vaporized, sublimated from reality in less than a second. The colossal body, now headless, stood for a moment as if confused, before crashing backwards with the world-shaking sound of a mountain collapsing, falling away from the trapped girl. The attack lasted for a single, glorious, terrible second. And then the power was gone. The backlash was absolute. Izuku was thrown backwards by the recoil, his body limp. His right arm was a ruin. The sleeve of his tracksuit was gone, incinerated. The arm itself was a mangled catastrophe. The bones, from his fingers to his shoulder, were shattered into countless pieces, the limb hanging at a grotesque, unnatural angle. But worse, far worse, were the burns. It wasn't red and blistered. It was blackened, charred, and split open in places, revealing the cooked muscle and shattered bone beneath. It looked like a piece of wood pulled from the heart of a forge, still smoking with faint green wisps of steam. The combination of Orphe's raw kinetic force and Emerald Flare's supercharged heat had created a self-inflicted wound of unimaginable agony. He was falling from the height of his jump, his vision fading to a pinpoint. He saw the girl, safe. He saw the other examinees staring up at him, their faces masks of pure, slack-jawed terror and awe. He saw Bakugo, standing frozen, his usual sneer completely gone, replaced by a look of utter, dumbfounded disbelief at the insane, self-destructive power he had just witnessed. "I did it," was Izuku's last coherent thought, a flicker of pride in an ocean of agony. "I saved her." Then, just before he hit the ground, he felt a strange, light sensation. The girl, her face streaked with tears, had slapped her hand on his back. "Release!" she cried, and his body was caught in her zero-gravity quirk, saving him from a fatal impact. He floated gently to the ground as the buzzer blared, signaling the end of the exam. He lay there, on the broken pavement, consciousness fading in and out. The pain was a distant, roaring ocean. He heard panicked shouts, the arrival of medics. He felt a gentle, grandmotherly touch and heard a familiar voice. "Goodness me!" Recovery girl sighed, looking at his destroyed arm. "A body with this much power, and this little control. Yue is going to have its hands full with this one." He must have passed out, because the next thing he knew, he was waking up to the gentle beeping of a heart monitor in a sterile white room. His arm was heavily bandaged and in a complex cast, a dull, throbbing ache radiating from it. Recovery girl was there. She explained that she'd healed the shattered bones and repaired the muscle, but the burns were another matter. They were too severe, a combination of kinetic trauma and deep tissue thermal damage that her quirk struggled with. They would leave terrible, permanent scars. She also told him his score. He had 31 villain points. But his actions with the zero-pointer had been noticed. "Saving that young lady from certain death earned you 60 rescue points, the highest score anyone has seen in years," she said, her expression a mix of admiration and stern disapproval. "You passed, son, with flying colors. But if you ever pull a stunt that's self-destructive again, this old lady won't be putting you back together." Later, after his mother had arrived and gone through a cycle of terrified tears and relieved hugs, his phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. He answered. "Young Midoriya?" The voice was thin, reedy. It was Tashinori. "All might," Izuku whispered, his own voice hoarse. There was a long pause. Izuku could hear a shaky breath on the other end of the line. "You broke your promise," Tashinori said, his voice quiet, devoid of any anger. It was worse. It was filled with a profound, weary disappointment. "I watched the security footage. I saw what you did. I had to," Izuku stammered, shame washing over him. "She was going to die." "I know," All Might said, and his voice cracked with a mixture of pride and terror. "You were a true hero. You saved her. You embodied the very spirit of one for all. But I also saw the result. I saw what happens when you combine the two powers. It was even worse than I feared." He coughed, a dry, rattling sound. "We were right, my boy. Your body is the furnace. Your quirk is the fire. And one for all is the gasoline. Today, you saved one life by nearly ending your own." He sighed, a sound heavy with the weight of generations. "I am so proud of you, and I am so terrified. We have a lot of work to do. Because you didn't just pass an entrance exam today, young Midoriya. You confirmed my greatest fear, and you showed the whole world a glimpse of a power it is not ready for." Izuku looked at his bandaged, ruined arm. He had passed the trial. He had become a student at his dream school. But the path forward was no longer bright and golden. It was paved with the embers of his own self-destruction, a trial by fire that was only just beginning. The first day at UA High felt like walking into a dream he hadn't earned. Every step Izuku took down the polished corridors, past the soaring glass windows that offered panoramic views of the city, felt conditional. The air itself seemed to thrum with potential, with the ghosts of heroes' past and the vibrant promise of heroes' future. For anyone else, it would be a purely triumphant moment. For Izuku, triumph was a far more complicated emotion. His right arm, encased in a complex, high-tech cast and cradled in a sling, was a constant, throbbing counterpoint to the elation in his heart. It was a physical reminder of the razor's edge he now walked. He'd made it in. He'd saved the girl. And he had come terrifyingly close to crippling himself permanently. The memory of the Emerald Overdrive, the searing, bone-shattering agony and the glorious, terrible wave of power, was seared into his mind. He had touched the twin suns, and the resulting flare had nearly unmade him. He found the classroom door for Class 1A and paused, his breath catching in his throat. The door was colossal, easily 4 meters high, a ridiculously oversized slab of wood and metal. It was a silent, architectural declaration: those who pass through this door are larger than life. He took a deep, steadying breath, the mantra a silent anchor in his mind. A tool, not a tantrum. Control. Focus. He slid the massive door open. The classroom was already humming with nervous energy. He recognized the stern, blue-haired boy with engines in his calves, Tenya Ida, lecturing another student about proper desk etiquette. Then his eyes landed on a familiar, explosive silhouette. Katsuki Bakugo had his feet propped up on his desk, his posture a carefully constructed sculpture of arrogant indifference. His crimson eyes scanned the room, dismissing every new face as an insignificant extra in his own story. Then, a cheerful voice cut through his apprehension. "Oh, it's you! The Fire Punch boy!" Izuku turned to see the girl with rosy cheeks from the exam. She was beaming at him, her brown eyes full of genuine warmth. "That was incredible what you did! Punching that giant robot's head clean off. It was amazing! And thanks for, saving me back there. I was totally stuck." Izuku's face erupted in a blush so intense he felt a faint shimmer of heat rise from his neck. "Oh! It's you! The nice girl! It was nothing, really! Are you okay? Your leg?" he stammered, his carefully constructed composure crumbling into his default state of flustered politeness. "Perfectly fine, thanks to recovery girl," she said, giving a little hop to demonstrate. "I'm Ochiko Uraraka, Izuku Midoriya," he managed, bowing slightly, which was awkward with his arm in a sling. Before he could say another word, a shadow fell over him. Bakugo was standing there, looming, his hands stuffed in his pockets. The lazy arrogance was gone, replaced by a cold, simmering rage. He wasn't looking at Uraraka. His glare was fixed solely on Izuku's bandaged arm. "So the walking disaster made it in," Bakugo sneered, his voice a low growl that cut through the classroom chatter. The few students nearby fell silent. "Let me guess. You pulled another one of your reckless, self-destructive stunts, and they gave you pity points for almost blowing your own arm off." Uraraka looked shocked. "Hey, that's not— Stay out of this, round face," Bakugo snapped without looking at her. His eyes, burning with a mix of fury and contempt, bored into Izuku's. "You think that's power, Deku? Hurting yourself more than the enemy? That's not strength. That's a goddamn liability. You don't belong here. You're just a time bomb waiting to take out everyone around you when you finally lose control for good." Izuku's own anger, a rare and deeply buried emotion, flickered. But he smothered it. Arguing with Bakugo was like trying to reason with a hurricane. He met his rival's gaze, his expression hardening. "I passed the exam, Kakin. That's all that matters. I'm here." He didn't cower. He didn't flinch. He just stood his ground, a small, scarred soldier refusing to yield. The change was not lost on Bakugo. The old Deku would have been a trembling, apologetic mess. This one was different. It infuriated him. With a disgusted "TCH," Bakugo turned and stomped back to his desk. "If you're just here to make friends, then you can pack up and leave." A new voice, monotone and utterly devoid of energy, drifted from the floor. The class turned to see a man in a yellow sleeping bag wriggling on the ground like a giant, exhausted caterpillar. He unzipped the bag and rose, revealing a man with tired, bloodshot eyes, a wild mane of black hair, and a capture weapon that looked like a bundle of scarves wrapped around his neck. "It took you 8 seconds to quiet down," Shota Aizawa said, his gaze sweeping over them with weary disappointment. "That's not going to work. Time is a precious resource. My name is Shota Aizawa. I'm your homeroom teacher." The collective shock of the class was a palpable thing. This was a pro-hero. He looked like he needed a 10-year nap. "Right," Aizawa said, pulling a blue gym uniform from his sleeping bag. "Get changed into these. Immediately. Meet me on the field." The pea field was bathed in the crisp morning sun. The students of Class 1A stood in a nervous line, clad in their identical blue uniforms. Izuku's sling had been removed at Aizawa's insistence. "If you can't participate without it, you can't participate at all." And his bandaged arm hung limply at his side, a dull, insistent ache. "A quirk apprehension test?" Several students chorused after Aizawa's explanation. "But what about the entrance ceremony? And orientation?" Uraraka asked, her brow furrowed with confusion. "If you want to be heroes, you don't have time for pointless ceremonies," Aizawa stated flatly. "UA is known for its freestyle educational system. That applies to us teachers as well." He turned his dead-eyed gaze on the class. "You've been doing these kinds of tests since junior high. 50-meter dash, standing long jump, grip strength. But you were never allowed to use your quirks. It's irrational. The ministry is run by fossils." He tossed a softball to Bakugo. "Bakugo, you finished first in the practical exam. What was your best softball throw in junior high?" 67 meters. Bakugo grunted. "Try it with your quirk," Aizawa said. Bakugo strode into the circle, a vicious grin spreading across his face. He wound up, and as he threw, he unleashed a massive explosion from his palm. "Die!" he screamed, the word echoing across the field. A concussive boom rocked the air, and the ball sailed through the sky on a plume of smoke. Aizawa held up a small device. It beeped. 705.2 meters. The class erupted in gasps and excited chatter. "Whoa! 705 meters? This looks like fun! We can use our quirks as much as we want." The word fun seemed to trigger something in Aizawa. His eyes narrowed, and a grim shadow passed over his features. "Fun? You think this is fun?" His voice dropped, losing its bored monotone and gaining a sharp, dangerous edge. "You have 3 years here to become a hero. You think it's all going to be games and fun times?" He smiled, a chilling, predatory grin that was all teeth. "So be it. The student who ranks last in total points for these 8 tests will be judged to have 0 potential, and will be expelled on the spot." Panic swept through the class like a wildfire. Expelled? On the first day? This was insane. This was unfair. Izuku's blood ran cold. The pressure was immense. He couldn't use one for all. Overusing Emerald Flare would lead to overheating, poor performance, and a potential repeat of his exam injury. He was starting at a massive disadvantage. He looked at his bandaged arm, then at Aizawa's merciless expression. He had to be smart. He had to be efficient. He had to be perfect. The first test was the 50-meter dash. Izuku was paired with Ida. As the starting pistol fired, Ida's engines roared to life. Izuku, reacting on pure instinct from his training, angled his feet and let out 2 quick, controlled bursts of green fire. Whoosh! Whoosh! The propulsion shot him forward, but Ida was a blur of motion, finishing in 3.04 seconds. Izuku crossed the line a moment later. The timer bot beeped, 4.13 seconds. It was a respectable time, far faster than he could have managed without his quirk, but not world-class. As he caught his breath, he felt a gaze on him. He glanced over and saw a boy with heterochromatic eyes, one gray, one brilliant turquoise, watching him. The boy's hair was parted perfectly, half white, half crimson. Shoto Todoroki. The son of the number 2 hero, Endeavor. Izuku knew him by reputation. Todoroki's expression was neutral, but his eyes lingered on Izuku's feet, where faint wisps of green steam were still dissipating. It wasn't a friendly look. It was analytical, cold, like a scientist observing a new, potentially hazardous specimen. Izuku quickly looked away, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. The second test, grip strength, was a humbling reminder of his limits. Without OFA, his score was a painfully average 56 kilograms. He saw a boy with multiple arms score over 540. The standing long jump was better. A single, powerful, sustained blast from his feet launched him clear across the sandpit. Again, he felt that cold gaze on him. This time, Todoroki's stare seemed to have sharpened, a flicker of something unreadable in his turquoise eye. Side-to-side steps were grueling. By the end, Izuku was panting, sweat beading on his forehead. Body temp, 37.8 C. Minimal, but climbing. I need to be careful. Then came the final, most crucial test, the ball throw. This was the test where he had to make his mark. He watched Uraraka get an infinity sign by using her zero gravity, and his mind raced. He couldn't afford a mediocre score here. Expulsion was a very real, very terrifying possibility. Bakugo got his 705.2 meters again, sneering at Izuku as he walked back. Beat that, you self-destructing idiot! It was finally Izuku's turn. He walked into the circle, the soft ball feeling heavy and alien in his left hand. He couldn't throw with his right. He looked at Aizawa. The teacher's gaze was unblinking, expectant. Show me what you've got, problem child. Izuku took a deep breath. A huge blast of fire was out of the question. It was inefficient, destructive, and would push his body temperature into the red zone. He needed finesse. He needed the control he had bled for on that polluted beach. He needed to apply his brain. He remembered a passage from his notebook 13 for the future, an analysis of heat-based quirks. Rapid, localized heating of a gas causes rapid expansion. If contained, this expansion creates a significant kinetic force. A controlled explosion. That was it. He wound up, his movements awkward with his non-dominant arm. He held the ball aloft for a second, right in front of his face. He focused his will, not on his hand, but on a tiny, spherical point in the air directly behind the ball. He fed his determination, his desire to prove himself, into that single point. A tool, not a tantrum. A scalpel, not a sledgehammer. Flare! Pulse! He yelled, the name giving form to his action. A tiny, brilliant green ember, no bigger than a pea, materialized in the air behind the ball. For a microsecond, it shone with the intensity of a miniature sun. Then, as he threw, he willed it to detonate. It didn't create a massive explosion. The sound was a sharp, contained crack-THOM, like a sonic boom. The air directly behind the ball was superheated to thousands of degrees in an instant, expanding outwards with incredible force. The soft ball was propelled forward as if fired from a cannon, a shimmering heat haze trailing behind it. It wasn't a pillar of fire, it was the elegant, brutal application of physics. The ball sailed high and far, a white speck against the blue sky. It landed with a distant puff of dust. Izuku stood there, panting, his left hand tingling, his body temperature spiking from the sudden, intense burst of energy. Body temp, 38.9 C. Close to the limit, but manageable. He looked up, a relieved, triumphant grin breaking across his face. He'd done it. He'd shown control. He'd shown power. He'd shown intelligence. Aizawa looked down at his device. His eyebrow twitched, the barest hint of surprise. He held it up. 705.1 meters, a murmur went through the class. Just 0.1 meters behind Bakugo. How did he do that without a huge explosion? Bakugo's face was a thunderous mask of disbelief and rage. To be nearly matched by Deku, and with a technique he didn't even understand, was a profound insult. But Izuku wasn't looking at Bakugo. He was looking at the source of a sudden, intense chill that had just washed over him, a cold so profound it seemed to leach the warmth from the air. Shoto Todoroki was staring at him, and this time, there was no neutrality. There was no scientific curiosity. His face was a mask of stone, and his heterochromatic eyes were filled with a cold, pure, and utterly unadulterated loathing. It was a glare that felt like frostbite on the soul. It wasn't the hot, explosive rage of Bakugo. This was a deep, glacial hatred, ancient and absolute. To Izuku, it made no sense. He'd barely interacted with the boy. Why would he look at him like that? Like he was something foul, something that needed to be eradicated from the face of the earth. Izuku's triumphant smile faltered and died. The coldness of that stare was more unsettling than any of Bakugo's threats. Todoroki stepped up for his turn. Without a word, he threw the ball. As it left his hand, a massive, jagged glacier of ice erupted from the ground, propelling the ball forward on a wave of frost. His power was immense, effortless, and utterly devoid of any emotion. He had used only his ice. Only his right side. He hadn't even glanced at his score as he walked back to the line, his icy gaze briefly flicking over Izuku once more before dismissing him entirely. The message was clear. You are beneath me. And I despise you. The rest of the tests passed in a blur for Izuku. He was too shaken by Todoroki's inexplicable hatred to properly focus. He was keenly aware of the two sets of eyes constantly on him, Bakugo's, burning with furious rivalry, and Todoroki's, freezing him with icy disdain. Finally, Aizawa projected the final scores. Izuku scanned the list, his heart hammering. He found his name. 18th place. He was safe. Minoru Mineta was in last place, sobbing hysterically. By the way, Aizawa said, a wicked grin spreading across his face as he pocketed his device. I was lying about the expulsion. The class stared, dumbfounded. It was a rational deception, he said, his smile vanishing. To draw out the upper limits of your quirks. Momo Yayorozu, a tall, elegant girl, put a hand to her chest. Of course it was a lie. It was obvious if you just thought about it for a moment. Izuku wasn't so sure. Aizawa seemed completely serious. As the class was dismissed to go change, Aizawa's voice stopped him. Midoriya. A word. Izuku's blood ran cold again. He walked over to his teacher, who was now looking at him with an unreadable expression. Your final score was passable. Aizawa began, his tone neutral. Just barely. Your quirk has immense destructive capability and, as you demonstrated with the ball throw, surprising versatility. You have a good analytical mind. Izuku felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe he'd impressed him after all. However, Aizawa's voice hardened, and his gaze dropped to Izuku's still bandaged arm. You are a glass cannon. You walk a knife's edge between effectiveness and self-immolation. You came to my class on the first day already injured from the reckless use of your own power. Today, you push yourself to your thermal limit just to keep up. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low, serious tone. I don't know the full story behind that arm, and I don't care. What I do care about is results and potential. You have potential, but your lack of durability makes you a poor investment. You are a high-risk, high-reward asset, and frankly, I don't have time for faulty equipment. The words were brutal, clinical, but Izuku knew they were true. Consider yourself on special watch. Aizawa finished, his eyes boring into Izuku's. I will push you harder than anyone else. I will test your control at every opportunity. Push yourself, learn your limits, and then learn how to smash past them without smashing yourself. But if you break again, if you end up in Recovery Girl's office because of your own foolish lack of control, I will personally see to it that you are transferred out of the hero course. Rationality dictates we don't waste resources. Am I understood? Yes, Sensei, Izuku said, his voice quiet but firm. He bowed his head, a strange mix of fear and gratitude welling up inside him. Aizawa was terrifying, but his harsh logic was a challenge. It was exactly the kind of fire he needed to be forged in. As he walked back to the locker room, his body aching and his mind reeling, Uraraka and Ida caught up with him. Midoriya! Ida said, chopping the air with his hand. I must apologize. I misjudged you earlier. Your performance was admirable, and your strategy with the ball throw was truly inspired. I was wrong to admonish you. It's okay, Ida, Izuku said, a small, tired smile on his face. That was so cool. Uraraka gushed. That little pew thing you did. And you didn't get expelled. I was so worried. Their warmth was a welcome balm after the harshness of Aizawa and the coldness of Todoroki. For a few moments, as they chatted on the way back to the classroom, He almost felt like a normal student. He was making friends. He belonged here. But as they rounded a corner, he saw him. Shoto Todoroki was standing alone by a window, bathed in the afternoon light. He turned his head as they passed, and his gaze locked with Izuku's one last time. The loathing was still there, a frozen, unmoving wall of ice. But this time, Izuku thought he saw something else flicker within the depths of that glacial stare. A deep, profound pain. Todoroki wasn't just looking at Izuku. He was looking at what Izuku represented. He saw a boy with a powerful, passionate fire quirk, a boy who used his flames with yells of exertion and smiles of triumph. And in that moment, Izuku began to understand, just a little. Todoroki wasn't just looking at another student. He was looking at a smiling, miniature reflection of his own personal demon. He was looking at everything he had been raised to hate, everything he had sworn to defeat. He was looking at endeavor.